was like, you're like football. I was like, it's March. Why is there any football going on?
Chapter 29 is all about the monetary system. This chapter is hugely foundational for the remainder of the semester. We're going to talk a lot about monetary policy and fiscal policy. And many of the questions on the AP exam, multiple choice and long and short answer, will say something like, what is the correct monetary policy response to this situation? And they'll give you a big situation. So you've got to understand the monetary policy to be able to approach about a third of the questions on the exam. So, let's move. Boom, 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 boom to you too. Computer's sassing me this morning. I don't have time for that. Alright, so this chapter in many ways is just about money and the Federal Reserve.
Boo.
What are you booing? Money or the Federal Reserve?
Federal Reserve.
Why are you booing the Federal Reserve?
I don't know.
What is the depth of your understanding about the role the Federal Reserve plays in our economy?
A lot.
Example. Yeah, I feel like a nut, but no thanks. You're booing for no reason, fool. Alright, so, what is money? Money is a medium of exchange, primarily. Okay. If we didn't have money, we'd have to barter. We'd have to have that double coincidence of wants. Remember that kind of thing? Like, Dayton's a pretty good mechanic, and my car needs a tune-up, and I can cut hair. But, look. We don't have a double coincidence of wants because Dayton is pretty clearly freshly shorn. And so I'm going to have to wait at least a month to get my car tuned up until Dayton needs a haircut so that I can give him a haircut and he can tune up my car. That doesn't work, right? Scott's little girl's going to have her first birthday party. He needs a cake for the party. What skill does Scott have? He's really good at peeling potatoes. So he needs somebody who needs a bunch of potatoes peeled at the same time that that person can cook a birthday cake for his daughter's party. Double coincidence of wants are difficult to come up with. Can you see how this would be the case? Then you can even get more complex and try to string together multiple people's double coincidence of wants so that you can get what you want out of person number 4. And etc. It's never a good thing. And it wastes a lot of time trying to find somebody on the other side of that double coincidence of wants.
Isn't that some party things?
Yes. So, double coincidence of wants, difficult to achieve, hard to carry through, timing is awkward, and it is very, very inefficient. Okay? Huge waste of your time. So, we come up with money. We use money instead. As long as everybody will accept money as that medium of exchange, we eliminate the need for the double coincidence of wants, which is a good thing. Imagine, I'm just going to use golf because I just looked at Hayden here. Imagine owning a golf course. And all of the needs that you have as a golf course owner, right? And everybody who wants to golf. So one person who wants to golf would have to be able to mow greens, and another person who wants to golf would have to be able to maintain sand traps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's never going to happen. We wouldn't have large public goods like that if we didn't have money. There are 3 functions of money, one of which is a medium of exchange. Can we use something else as a medium of exchange? Does it have to be money as we think of it? No, it certainly doesn't. Have you ever heard of something called a prison economy? Cigarettes. Huge form of currency in the prison economy. Cigarettes are money.
Yeah, toothbrush and sharp.
Money is also used as a unit of account. Unit of account, how much is it worth? X amount of dollars, or 15 cigarettes. How many of you have ever seen Shawshank Redemption? Okay. How much does every poster cost? A certain amount of cigarettes. Okay. Unit of account. How much do you have in your savings? You give me a dollar amount.
47 cigarettes.
Money is also a store of value. This dollar today is worth how much?
No.
How much will it be worth tomorrow?
No.
How much was it worth a week ago?
We don't have that.
And a month from now? It's a store of value.
That's the one.
Now, its purchasing power may change, but its value remains the same. Follow? Okay, there's commodity money. It has actual value. If I take this to France, what is it worth?
Nothing.
Nothing. What if I take it to Malawi? Nothing. Is there something that I could take to those places that would be worth something? What? No, I want commodity money. Gold. Excellent form of commodity money. Everyone recognizes its intrinsic value. Cigarettes in POW camps or prison. In POW camps, Hershey bars were often included in Red Cross packages, and they divide so nicely into those 12 little squares, the rectangles. Every rectangle had a value. Then there is fiat money. Fiat money, money that has no intrinsic value, but is worth something simply because the government says so. That is fiat money. You agree with me that it's worth $1. Why is it worth $1? Because the government says so. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. The government says so, and they say so on the bill, on all of the bills that the Treasury puts in. Okay? The US dollar, the euro, the yen, the British pound, Chinese yuan. There is an island in the South Pacific, and its name is escaping me right now, where there are giant wheels of stone.
Easter Island?
No, those are giant heads of stone, and that's in the Eastern Pacific. Giant wheels of stone that are their money, and they are fiat money. You would exchange these giant wheels of stone in exchange for a dowry, for a bride, or to buy a home or land. If you go home and Google fiat money, they'll come up. It's pretty amazing. Some of them are taller than I am. All right, so the money supply is how much money is out there in the economy. I don't think I've ever seen a question on a released exam that called it money stock. That gets awfully confusing. Stick with money supply.
Yap. Is that the island?
Yes. No, Yap is the currency. Is it the island of Yap?
The
Maybe
island
it is.
There's a tiny island called Yap.
Yep, then that's it. Yep, then that's it.
I I thought he was being a smart aleck about, like you say that
Yeah,
you've
smart
never seen it on
aleck.
AP exam. Yep, sure had it.
That's
I'm
what I
like,
thought he was doing. I was like, what are you talking
The
about?
island of Yap. Yep. Okay, so what assets are part of the money supply? Currency, the actual paper bills and metal coins in the pockets. And note that it says in the hands of the non-bank public, meaning out there in circulation. And here's where the bank comes in. This is your demand deposits. This is the money you can walk into the bank and say, gimme, and they gotta hand over to you. This is what's in your savings and your checking accounts. So that and the currency that's in your wallets and stuff between your mattress and your box spring, plus what's in your bank accounts, that is the money supply. There's a breakdown of the money supply. Yes, you need to know these. M1 is the currency and the demand deposits, so everything we just looked at on the last slide, plus traveler's checks and other checkable deposits. A checkable deposit is one for which you can write a check and the check will be paid. That's your money market account. So M1 is all the money that can be readily spent. M1 at this point is over $2 trillion. M2 is everything in M1 plus your savings, your small time deposits, so your CDs, mutual funds, a few other things. The one that is of most concern to us is M1. Look at how much money people have in savings. 7 trillion in difference there, okay? 7 trillion in the savings. That's a lot of investment, isn't it? M1 and M2, the difference between them is not going to matter to us. I want you to know that a difference exists. For those of you who will go on and take any level of economics beyond Intro 2, which is what you're in, it will matter. But for us, and for the AP exam, it does not matter. All right. Central bank oversees the banking system and regulates the supply of money. Nearly every economy has a central bank. We call ours the Federal Reserve. Nearly every economy has one. Okay? When the central bank acts, it acts in the form of monetary policy. You've already thought about and heard about the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. That is an action of monetary policy. There are several articles already out in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post this morning about the Federal Reserve. Your current events assignments just got so much easier with the opening of the concept of monetary policy. Shorthand, we call it the Fed. By the way, what is the name of the chair of the Federal Reserve now?
Emperor.
It's no longer Janet Yellen.
That was good.
Y'all might want to know that. By the way, this week we have in-service on
Friday.
Friday. You got out of last week's current events quiz. Nobody had one because it wasn't fair to give them just to the evens and not the odds. But you will have one this week, and it will be on Thursday.
What's in service?
Good.
I mean, where the teachers have to come in but we don't because.
On Friday?
Yeah.
Yeah, they.
Friday sounds
Why,
like
I
great.
did not know that.
It's
Right.
right there on the calendar.
That's so clutch.
Okay, how's the Fed set up?
Saturday, Thursday.
There's a board of governors. They meet in Washington D.C. at the Federal Reserve Building. How many of you have ever been to Washington D.C.? You visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial? Okay. Just behind the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, when you're standing there gazing into it, is where the Federal Reserve Building is. There are also 12 regional banks. We are in the Kansas City regional banks realm. We do have a sub-regional Federal Reserve Bank here in Omaha, right downtown. Some people would call it west of downtown, but it's east of the interstate.
Is it like in a big building?
You hardly even notice it because it's mostly sunken down into the ground. The ground is raised up around it. And it's got a lot of open ground around it. It's just west of where the old Children's Museum used to be. It's northwest of the Children's Museum now.
So do they keep money in
They do. Lots of it.
I know where I'm robbing.
Yeah.
It is the Federal Open Market Committee. The Federal Open Market Committee, which is the Board of Governors and the chairs of some of the regional banks, who decide on our monetary policy. And they meet, and the minutes of their meetings are always published, public information. So a lot of times people will read the minutes, and that's the information that they use to forecast what they think the Federal Reserve will do in the future. Sometimes what the Fed does isn't referred to as monetary policy, it's referred to as open market action based upon the Open Market Committee. Okay? That's an important synonym to know. What open market action should the Fed take at this time is how a question might be posed.
They should do nothing.
What?
So they should do nothing.
Okay. Now, we're going to start getting a little technical. And you have to do this stuff right from the beginning, or your answers will be wrong and you'll be frustrated. We have a fractional reserve banking system in this country since the Depression and the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. Before we had a fractional reserve system, there was no requirement that banks keep any money around. They could loan out everything they took in. 'Tis bad. As scholars, you've all studied the Great Depression and runs on banks. Not good. So the banks are required to keep a certain percentage of their deposits in reserve, and they can loan out the rest. It is the Fed who establishes those reserve requirements. Those reserve requirements are part of monetary policy. That's one part of monetary policy. Banks can certainly choose to hold more than the minimum if they want. However, in so doing, they are limiting their potential for profit. Because banks make money by loaning money out. And if they choose not to loan out the maximum amount, if they are a publicly held bank, meaning they have shareholders to answer to, the shareholders might be asking some tough questions.
Why would they ever hold out more?
They might choose to hold more than the minimum reserve requirement if the bank thinks they know something about what's going on in the economy.
It's like after 2007.
So the reserve ratio is capital R. That capital R stands for that fraction that the banks have to keep in their deposits. And they have to keep it as reserves. The R is always expressed as a fraction or a percentage of the total deposits. How many of you in here have had some accounting? Okay, you should be fairly comfortable with this next slide. The T account.
Get it away from me.
Okay. A T account is a really simple accounting statement that shows assets and liabilities. Okay. Assets and liabilities. For those of you who haven't had accounting, sometimes your head gets turned around a little inside out with assets and liabilities. Because we tend to think of an asset as something good that we have. And yet here, deposits are a liability. And how many of you would, off the top of your head, think of as a deposit as an asset?
Over bank, it's
But for a bank, it's not their money. It's somebody else's money. They are liable to have to return that money. Think of it that way. Be the bank when you're thinking about assets and liabilities here. Yes, sir?
so if a guy were to walk into like a small like town bank and give like them $1 million and then they loaned it out, and came a day and wanted all of his $1 million back, does that mean he wouldn't get it?
Oh, he has to get it.
Yeah, they
Or
have
they're
to, like,
violating the banking laws.
they would just tell him that he has to wait, they have to get some more.
Yeah, sometimes they'll ask you to wait a little bit of time. They'll borrow it from the Federal Reserve to get in his money.
So
In
then
a
is that
small town where there's not a Federal Reserve right there, let's say he's like in Scotts Bluff, or it's a long ways away from the Denver or the Omaha branch, he may have to wait a day to get that actual cash if he wants cash.
So does that mean $1 million is a liability while it's in there?
Yeah, any deposit is a liability to the bank while it's in there, because they gotta be able to give it back.
It's kind of like if you loan.
So the loan is an asset because that's money that they're going to be taking in. What would you say, looking at this, what is the reserve requirement in this scenario? 10%, because they're holding $10 out of a $100 deposit. One big thing, and the accounting students will tell you this, the sides of the T-chart must be equal. If they're not, somebody's going to jail. And there's the equation that told you how we figured out 10%. Not necessarily tough stuff, right? Not when we're dealing with a deposit of 100.
I
That's
can't
easy.
do it.
That's easy.
How do you do that?
All right. So, our entire economy has $100 of money in circulation.
Nice.
So we're going to calculate the money supply in 3 different scenarios. Remember, the entire money supply is $100. This is a very, very simple economy. Okay? We're going to look at this economy if there's no banking system,
Oh, no.
if there's a 100% reserve requirement, meaning anything that goes into the bank has to stay in the bank, meaning the bank is no different than a safe in your basement.
Nice.
Okay? Or if they have a fractional reserve banking system. In the case where we have no banking system, the public holds the $100 as currency. Period.
Oh.
The money supply is what? $100. That's all there is. No more complex than that. If we have a 100% reserve requirement banking system, and the public deposits the $100 at First National Bank, First National Bank is going to hold all of that deposit as reserves. They make no loans. What is the money supply?
$100.
Still $100. Demand deposit. Still $100. A bank that operates in a 100% reserve requirement
Yeah.
scenario. A bank that obeys the law. All right. Banks don't alter the money supply if they have a 100% reserve requirement. It's important that you know that, because we use banks to grow our money supply. You're about to see some economic wizardry. Are you fully prepared for it?
Not.
There's nothing up my sleeves, nothing in my hat, and yet you're going to see me multiply our money supply.
I'll give you $20 if you can make it more.
We have a fractional reserve system. We put our $100 in the bank, the entire money supply is deposited in the bank, and First National Bank holds 10%. They're going to loan out all but 10% of the deposit. So they hold $10 and they loan out 90. What is the money supply in this economy? I heard 190, and I heard
109.
Loans go to another bank, then it will be more.
$200.
But right now, if it's just sitting in the guy's
Final
hand, it's
answer.
100.
there's $100 in deposits
It's 190.
and $90 in currency that was loaned out to whoever took out the loans. So our money supply is 190. We just made money. We just created money out of.
Wow.
Oh yes, happens every day.
This is
How
all-
many of you have deposited money in a bank in the past month? You have been an instrument of the increase in the money supply. Congratulations for participating in the active growth of our economy.
What
about if we take it out?
You take it out. Are you decreasing the money supply if you take money out of the bank?
No.
Yes. You are.
Not being
Uh-oh.
What?
Uh-huh.
Come on, man.
All right. So how did the money supply suddenly grow? I didn't even say abracadabra and it grew by 90%. Oh, focus. That's well played, Andrew. Well played. Okay. When banks make loans, they are creating money. Okay. The borrower gets that currency, which is an asset in the money supply. That $90 in new debt doesn't have an offsetting effect on the money supply. It's such a beautiful thing. This is the catch. The fractional reserve banking system creates money, but it doesn't create wealth. And you have to fundamentally understand that there is a difference between money and wealth. Think about it for a second. Why isn't that $90 that was created wealth?
Because it's
Double
yeah, you don't
Not about double counting.
because it's like
It's an asset to the bank. But what is it on my personal T-chart? It's a liability. It is an obligation. And in fact, on my personal T-chart, we can assume that there is some interest associated with it, right? So I don't just have $90 of obligation on my personal chart. I have 91, 95, $100 of obligation. In fact, not only have I personally not created wealth for myself, I have more impoverished myself. And if I'm not going to use that money I borrowed to grow it, then I am definitely diminishing my wealth. So when we talk in Hoke's personal finance lessons, boys and girls, about the borrowing of money, and I told you there's two okay kinds of debts. What are they? Student loans and mortgage. Because the mortgage, over your lifetime, that home is going to gain value. There are times when the home may decrease in value. If you wait long enough, it will grow in value. So you are borrowing money to create wealth. Your student loan, provided you actually finish your education and use that money to pursue an education which trains you for a career or to actually do something, that is good money because you are creating that liability for yourself in order to create wealth in the future. If you borrow that money and go to school for 2 years and drop out, that what was potentially good debt has become very, very bad, very toxic debt. If you borrow that money to go to NYU, to acting school, and are a terrible actor, bad debt. If you borrow that money to get a philosophy degree, and I'm not saying philosophy is a bad thing to be studied,
You just laughed.
but what I am saying is that philosophy is not a career. You can't walk in somewhere and say, "Here is my diploma in philosophy. I am now prepared to run this company." No, they'll say, "Here is an application to the Burger King next door." Okay?
Why would they have applications to the Burger King?
If you major in philosophy, you just become a philosophy teacher. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and depending on where you got that degree from, that debt may follow you to the grave.
Yeah.
So, you have to be careful and make sure that the debt you acquire will produce wealth in the future. Bad debt. Buying your groceries on a credit card and not paying it off every month. Why would you choose to pay interest for months on end on a frozen pizza you consume in one evening?
1 hour.
One
More
minute.
like a couple minutes.
Yeah.
We gotta wait till.
Clothing
Warm it up.
on a credit card, which you do not pay off at the end of every month. Clothing wears out. You grow out of it, it gets holes, it goes out of style, you replace it. It does not create wealth for you. Am I being concrete enough?
Yeah.
Okay, end of personal finance lesson. Back to money supply.
Back to this.
Okay. So now, hang on. I'm not done with the magic.
It's gonna disappear.
Scott deposited that first $100 in the bank. He was the only one in our entire economy who had money with $100 in the bank.
Oh, God.
Dayton walked in and borrowed $90.
Know what it felt like.
She walks next door and deposits that $90 at the Second National Bank,
Oh my.
who then turns around,
Loads it.
loans out $81 to John.
What did you need $81?
Yes.
Jonathan then walks walks next door and deposits the $81 at the Third National Bank. And now we start getting into pennies, and I don't do the math in my head anymore. And Andrew loans or borrows out $72.90. Look at how much money we have created, all from Scott's deposit of the 100 actual dollars. But again, we have created money and not wealth. Keep those two things clear. Yes, sir.
Doesn't like the Federal Reserve
We all want money.
have to keep money set aside to
Yes.
make sure that,
Yes.
is that what the goal's for?
No,
It took
we
off
are
the
no
gold
longer on the
standard.
gold standard
That was
nor
what
the
they-
silver standard. All right. Every time you deposit money into a bank, you are contributing to increasing the money supply because you know that bank is going to turn around and loan the money out.
That's what I do.
Carry that $100 out all the way on a 10% reserve requirement, and we end up with a money supply of $1,000.
So you stop.
Wow.
You give $1,000.
So you can just multiply by the inverse.
One
Yes.
Benji.
To figure out how much a deposit will increase the money supply, if everything is carried forward and nobody stops and buries the money in their backyard at any point, multiplying the initial deposit by the inverse of the reserve requirement is how you figure out how much the money supply increases.
So, deposit times R.
Times the inverse of R.
Yeah.
This is known as the money multiplier. I wish I had a game show host voice. Johnny, can you tell us what they've won? They've won the money multiplier. Any of you watch the Oscars last night?
I won.
Oh.
Yeah, till midnight.
The Jets.
won.
Are you kidding me? They were over at 10:20.
Yeah, maybe I was recording it.
Yeah, they were over at 10:20.
Dude, those speeches, I thought Jimmy Kimmel's speech about the jet ski was funny.
But that was awesome.
He showed his speech again.
The money multiplier is 1 over R. There's your inverse. You have to know that. You have to know that. Mark, are you okay?
No, Mark's like wigging out this whole hour, especially with that Powerade bottle.
What did you just do?
Kind of looked like he had a little seizure. I'm not sure.
A couple times.
Did you head fall off the water bottle?
See that? Everybody got that?
Mark.
Cause math?
Not yet.
Go to the bank. Gotta go to the bank after school.
Hey, guess what, guys? I've given you all sorts of information, and now it's time to use it. Which makes it practice time!
Okay.
Oh my gosh! Spring cleaning time, boys and girls, and you're cleaning out your sofa. Find a $50 bill and a half-eaten taco.
I don't know how to eat taco. No, they were.
Let's not investigate that half-eaten taco further, nor let us dwell on the fact that it's been weeks since you actually practiced Taco Tuesday.
You deposited.
You take that bank, you take that $50 bill to the bank and deposit it. In an economy where the Federal Reserve requires 20% reserve requirement.
Oh
What is the maximum amount, how much could money supply possibly go up?
my. Hang on. We
200.
gotta think, guys.
What is 20% maximum?
No, you gotta increase, you gotta multiply 40 and it's 20.
Who said 40? It's a $50 bill. There's no such thing as a $40 bill.
No.
1 divided by
Yeah,
R
huh?
is 1 divided by 0.25 times 250. It'll go up $200.
Dayton says $200. Anybody want to argue something different?
The original amount is 250, but you're adding 200 to the answer.
Yeah. You got 50, it goes to 250. An increase $200.
So Dayton said 200, Jared said 250. Now Dayton's convinced
No,
that
I
he
agree
agreed.
with him.
It goes up to 250, but from 50 to 250 is 200.
Yeah,
So like, what does it increase by?
it
Increase by
increases by
200, up to
by
$250.
Technically, Dave answered the question, I think it was just stupid. You're just being stupid.
what's the minimum amount the money supply could increase?
$0.
Wrong.
Just go to none, they keep all of it.
Let me help you read.
If you deposit it, it's 50.
And the bank keeps all the money,
But you
Money
deposit it into the money supply.
and you said that that's the minimum that they, what if they keep all of it, you said that.
Bank holds no excess reserves. No excess reserves. Money multiplier is 5. You put $50 in. That multiplies to how much when you multiply 50 times 5? Okay. But wait. Currency at the point in which you found the bill in your couch was how much?
50.
So the money supply was
50.
50. You deposit that 50 in the bank and we get a 250 increase. But what happens to currency? What happened to that $50 bill?
It's not money.
It's not in the money supply anymore. So currency went down $50. So the maximum increase in money supply is $200.
Boy, Jared, get help. Get help on
Okay. You can't count the currency that went in as an increase because it was already in the money supply. Got it?
Yes.
Let's just say that, 'cause they-
Now, what's the minimum amount the money supply can increase?
$0. $0.
Dayton is so sure it's 0. Anybody want to argue with him?
You said that the minimum is 20%, but it doesn't mean that they can't hold 100%.
Correct. The bank can choose to not loan any of that out.
Zero enough.
So bad. I know, that's what she was trying to say I was wrong, no, I was not moving.
Good job, Dave.
Thank you, we're proud of you.
No, we're not.
At least
Got
somebody
it?
is.
So currency, when you put that $50 in, currency balance goes down $50, but demand deposit balance goes up $50. So in the end, there's no net change. It's kind of like when we sell something out of inventory in GDP. Comes out of one column, goes into another, net change.
When
Yeah.
you talk about currency, you're talking about like money like
Yeah.
outside of
Actual paper money, yep,
So like it goes down because it's no longer in.
in circulation, yeah. All right. So in the real world, we have assets. In the real world, banks hold more than just deposits and loans and reserve requirements. They're also going to hold some securities. They're also going to have some equity. They're going to issue some debt. They might buy debt from other banks. Talk to your parents and they'll have gotten their home mortgage from Bank XYZ, but that will have been sold to someone else who then services their mortgage. So debt can be bought and sold.
Can we buy the debt?
If you bought the right things on the market, yes, you can buy the debt. That's how we ended up in the market collapse in 2007. People were gambling on that bad debt. Okay. Banks have capital. Bank capital is what you get when one side of the T-chart doesn't equal the other. As long as it's a positive not equal the other. Then the bank has actual value, intrinsic value, they have capital. For instance, a bank generally owns its building. And that building is an asset. And you can't loan out the building. And so your assets and liabilities columns don't balance unless you're calculating capital. Follow?
Yes.
I hope so. Okay. Then there's leverage. Leverage is where you borrow money to add to money you may already have to invest. And this is the department that I worked in at Ameritrade, where I was a credit risk analyst, and I called people when they were over leveraged in their accounts. You deposit $1,000 in, and they'll let you borrow another $1,000, so that you essentially have leveraged your asset, your $1,000. So you can then buy $2,000 worth of stock. That's great. You're a 50% owner in $2,000 worth of stock. Until that stock value goes down to $1,500, and then you are a 25% owner in $1,500 of stock. Because you lost your money. You didn't lose the bank's money or the lender's money.
They don't take it off from the
Follow that?
$1,000 they give you.
They didn't choose that investment. You did. You borrowed the money. They only want the money back.
Yeah, so no matter how much you make.
So like if they match it with $1,000 and the stock goes down, you're losing your money, not the $1,000 they put in. That's
Exactly.
What if the stock
Exactly.
So why
goes
would anyone
low?
leverage?
But it's the
Hoping
same
that
with-
their stocks wouldn't lose money.
Right. You of course leverage thinking you've got the sure thing. See you tomorrow. Do not neglect studying this stuff every night, guys. The quiz.